All right. I know it feels like just yesterday we did the top 10 cards for Paldea Evolve, and that was a crazy good set. Just packed full of impactful cards. Not necessarily a bunch of new archetypes, but some good ones. Stuff like Iono, just absolutely changing the way decks are played. And now we have Obsidian Flames. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. This is not one of the better sets we've seen, but there are some cards to be aware of. They're just This set is not nearly as crazy as Paldea Evolved. Let's put it that way. It is a set, and we will have fun with it all the same. All right, with that said, we're going to start out, as always, with the art highlights. Art highlights are where we start and observe and enjoy the art from the set prior to mocking the set for its lack of playable cards. We're going to start out with two different Ninetales artworks. One by Yoshioka and one by the same artist that did the really awesome Crown Zenith alternate art for Hisuian Zork V-Star. So two really cool arts for Ninetales. Just pretty to look at, honestly. I definitely want this Ninetales, one of my chase cards from this set. I really, really like this artist, and I still really want to grab that Zork. I just got to pick it up and buy it. I did not really buy any Crown Zenith, unfortunately. A couple more cards, just kind of the base rarities. We have a really awesome looking Lechonk by Kamiya. Kamiya is a divisive artist, and I will be frank, I don't like most of their art, but I do like this card, and it's very, very colorful, very pretty. And then, of course, one of my favorite artists lately has been Shinji Kanda, and they have produced this beautiful Bronzor. So, two very cool arts to look at. Yeah, just very bright and colorful. It's nice to see. And of course, because there is an Oddish in this set, we do have to have the Oddish spotlight. Oddish, Gloom, another Gloom, and Blossom. Blossom didn't have to wait another 10 years for another card, which is crazy to say. Blossom only went a couple of sets before it got another card. Is a super playable. We'll look at it in just a second, but let's admire the art real quick. That Gloom, the illustration rare, is super, super cool. I do really like that card. Another chase card for me for this set is definitely that Gloom. Obviously, with the Blossom being an uncommon, I am absolutely going to be building a deck out of it. Maybe more than one, because it is 3/4/5 legal too. So standard and 3/4/5. I will probably build at least one Blossom deck if they're not cross legal. They might be though. Yeah, super excited to see Blossom again. And let's look at Blossom. So Blossom has Sleep Powder, 30 damage, and then puts Pokemon to sleep, and Powerful Dance 90 times. So this is a coin flip card, a little better than the one in Crown Zenith, I think. So similar to the Maractus in Scarlet and Violet base set, or the Torkoal, I think it's in Scarlet Violet base set. You just load this up with energy, and then you get lots of coin flips based on the energy attached to it. So you're going to be doing 90 times each head. So let's say you have 10 energy attached, you're flipping 10 coins. On average, you'll get 5 heads. You do the math, that's a lot of damage. So if you have really good luck, hey, it's awesome. This will be a great meme deck. I can't wait to have some fun with it. Yeah, but awesome. Now, reprints. This hurts. They could have done some very interesting things with it, but instead, we have exact art reprints of Arven and Team Stargrunt from Scarlet Violet base set. There's nothing special about these prints. They are literally just exactly the same card, same art, same text, same everything, but with Obsidian Flames' badge on it instead of Scarlet Violet base sets and the new set numbering. These images you see here are barely different from the official cards for these prints, unfortunately. Now, what could they have done? Because so the situation with Obsidian Flames is they're pulling obviously from a lot of junk sets in Japan, right? So Black Flame Ruler was the main set, but Black Flame Ruler only has so many trainer cards in it that they could pull to make cards for our Obsidian Flame set. But there are things they could have done that would have been really cool, right? Instead of just reprinting 2 random supporter cards from Scarlet Violet base set, they could have said, you know what, let's take the arts from these 3 currently standard legal cards that never saw an English release during the Sun and Moon era and reprint them with their current regulation marks, right? So Escape Rope could have had an E regulation mark. Nest Ball could have gotten a G regulation mark. Palpad could have gotten a G regulation mark. They could pull these images, slap them on some Scarlet and Violet templates, and be done with it, right? We would finally get these cards with their new arts. Well, for us, new arts. We would finally get these arts, right? We would have these 3 cards in the set. They would make Nest Ball, Escape Rope, and Palpad a little bit more accessible for everyone. and it'd be great. Like, everybody wins. We get the new arts. The set's not just bloated, right? I mean, it's still bloated, but there's some cool stuff in it at least. But that's not what they did. Instead, we got this. Meh. Boo. All right. Before I grumble too much about that, the honorable mentions. Starting out first with Gita. So Gita says, until the end of the turn you play this card, none of your Pokemon can attack. This includes Pokemon that came into play this turn. So search your deck for up to 2 basic energy cards and attach them to one of your Pokemon, then shuffle your deck. So you can't attack, but you can attach 2 energies from your deck in exchange for that. It's not too bad. Probably a little too slow for the current format, which is why it's a keep an eye on it card rather than a super good card. But it's an interesting card, which is why it's in the honorable mentions. Definitely worth being aware of in the future. Next up, we have Revavroom. So Revavroom has the ability to tune up. So this Pokemon may have up to 4 Pokemon tools attached to it. If it loses this ability, discard Pokemon tools from it until only 1 remains. This is very much identical to Genesect GX and to Honchkrow V's abilities. Same effect, right? Attach 4 tools, which is pretty cool. Wild Drift, 170 damage. So during your opponent's next turn, this Pokemon takes 30 less damage from attacks after applying weakness and resistance. Okay, so what could you do with Tune Up, right? You could slap some tools on there. You could do things like Choice Belt and do much extra damage, or you could do, let's see here, damage reduction. Like there are things you could do, even with tools coming out in like Scarlet Violet 151. And then, while this is very weak to Path of Peak, there is a card on this list that actually protects it from Path of Peak. So we will definitely have to get a look at that. It'll be a fun one. So this is kind of a high attack cost too for not a whole lot of damage. So you would want some sort of boosting damage, I think, or at least some way to really bolster your HP, which you could do. Like I said, there's a tool in 151 that reduces damage to stage 1 stake, so this would definitely be an option for Revavroom. Next up is Cryogonal. Cryogonal has a fast freeze, does 30 damage, and if you go second, not first, if you go second and it's your first turn, your opponent's active Pokemon is now paralyzed. So this is kind of one of those sneaky one-off inclusions that you can get off on a right game that might just happen to get you ahead of your opponent. But this is one of those things that it's going to be really situational. Most decks won't use it. Maybe a control archetype here or there will. Again, something to be aware of, but not necessarily something that will actually see a ton of play. Also, Ice Cube. So Ice Cube has Scorching Block. Does 160 damage. Discard an energy from this Pokemon. During your opponent's next turn, the defending Pokemon can't attack. So that's pretty crazy, right? This is basically a way to say no to your opponent. All you have to do is load it up with energy, which it's a basic Pokemon, and you can slap this guy in Shen Pao if you're playing Baxcalibur anyway, and you're loaded up and you're doing some damage. So they are now forced to retreat, forced to switch in order to do damage to this Ice Cube. It's interesting. Again, it may be too situational. It may be one of those things where it's just not good enough. Sure. But it is worth keeping an eye on because this is a card that will probably see a little bit of play here and there. And up next is Mawile. Mawile has the ability Special Eater. When you play this Pokemon from your hand onto your bench during your turn, you may discard a special energy from your opponent's active Pokemon. And then Sharp Fang, which does 90 damage, but you don't care about Sharp Fang, you care about Special Eater. So what can this do? This, well, in current standard format, actually doesn't do all that much, let's be honest. Unfortunately, the biggest accelerator of special energies is Archeops, so discarding a single special energy is probably not very much against Lugia. It could disrupt them later game when they're a little lower on energies, or if you discard the right energy at the right time. But then you're kind of banking on that as being your strategy, and it's probably not quite enough. This could cripple Arceus if you get it down turn 1 after they've attached Double Turbo. But then if they've attached just a basic energy turn 1, it's probably too little too late by the time that they've accelerated and evolved up and everything. So, and then you can't even really hurt Mew with it, because if they have a Fusion Strike energy attached to the Pokemon, then it just does nothing. Because Mew has everything it could ever want. Let's be honest. Mew just has all the tools all the time ever. So brilliant. But Mawile is one of those cards that in the future, especially after Archeops rotates, could be a consideration for some decks. There was a Giratina in late Sun and Moon that did exactly the same thing for its ability. Saw a little bit of play, but not a ton, and I expect this Mawile will be very much the same, where it does see a tiny bit of play, but at least right away, not much. Okay, it is time for the top 10. So I'm just going to state this right out. The majority of the top 10 in this set list, or in Obsidian Flames, the cards that made top 10 in Obsidian Flames, most of them would have struggled to make honorable mentions in Paldea Evolve's top 10. In fact, I think the majority of them would have probably missed it. Just keep that in mind. Some of these cards are a little less good than we are used to seeing for these top 10s, but they're still worth keeping an eye on. Starting with Palafin. So Palafin has Jet Punch, does 30 damage, and then does 30 damage to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, assuming they don't have Manaphy in play, and then don't apply weakness and resistance for bench Pokemon. And then Justice Kick does 210 damage, which is pretty good damage. And if this Pokemon didn't move from the bench to the active spot during this turn, this attack does nothing. So if you flipped between the bench to the active, that's 210. That is not if you evolved up in the active spot. It doesn't work. It has to move from the bench to the active. Card is pretty decent. Damage output is pretty good. The attack cost is not too bad. The biggest downside that Palafin has at the moment is that it doesn't deal especially well with high HP Pokemon, right? You're having to try to two-shot stuff. Certain decks, like Tyranitar especially, can just share all the damage off. And it feels real bad for Palafin, especially against Tyranitar, because Tyranitar is a weakness. So it can even use its first attack and not have to do anything with regard to its resources or trying to set up. So, Palafin, good. However, not great. That said, in the future, if we get a Pokemon X of Palafin, so if we get a multi-prize Palafin, they would both evolve from Finison, and this would be a good option as a single prizer in such a deck. However, as of yet, we do not have a multi-prizer Palafin, so be advised. At number 9, we have Lunatone with the ability New Moon. If you have any Soul Rock in play, prevent all effects of stadium cards done to your Pokemon. So that is quite an interesting effect. So you have to have a Soul Rock in play, which you can do, right? And if you have a Soul Rock in play, you don't get affected by stadium cards, yours or your opponent's. So if they have Path of Peak in play, this is what I was talking about when I was talking about Reprint, right? So Lunatone would shield all of your Pokemon from the effect of Path of Peak, so long as you have Soul Rock in play. Flip side, if they have, or even if you have Altar of Sinnoh out, same thing, right? You're going to be shielded from the effect of Altar of Sinnoh. So, Lunatone and Soul Rock, probably the one for Pokemon Go, let's be honest, are a consideration as a tech in a deck if you maybe want to shield yourself from those effects. Most decks probably won't run it. Mew definitely will not run it. I say that now, and somebody's going to do it and win something with it. But Mew should not be running it, I don't think. But it could, and protect itself and just draw off of 3 Genesect, I guess, or 2 Genesect by the time you get the Lunatone and the Soul Rock. Don't do that. Please don't do that. But Mew runs Aerodactyl sometimes, so what do I know? Anyway, Lunatone. Definitely worth considering. I know there's been some talk and some gameplay of Lunatone being played with the Shadow Rider Calyrex VMAX, which is very interesting because you can throw down Path and then using Lunatone, Lunatone and Soul Rock, spam a bunch of energy into play and then start hitting really hard with Shadow Rider. So between Shadow Rider's ability and Lunatone or Soul Rock's ability, you just basically flood the board completely with energy and do tons of damage. So pretty interesting deck. Definitely worth considering if you're interested in revisiting Shadow Rider. Next up is Scissor. Scissor has Punishing Scissors. 10 plus damage. This attack does 50 damage for each of your opponent's Pokemon in play that has an ability. That is a lot of damage. So if you can get Scissor up very quickly and very easily, that is something to consider, especially in something like a Zorobox deck, where you can flip them into play using Zoroark's ability. However, it is also worth noting that this particular card is very, very similar to a Flapple. It has basically the same. The attack has exactly the same effect, but does not have a 10 base damage, so it's just 10 less damage effectively for the same effect. And the Flapple has a colorless attack cost, so it'll be a little bit easier to pull off. So unless Scissor is kind of a focus in some way, shape, or form, or if you really want to hit Metal Weakness, maybe you are struggling with Chen Pao, Scissor, Flapple are very, very similar cards and maybe somewhat identical. But again, if you're running a Zoroark deck, or if you're running, maybe you're trying to focus on Scissor somehow, maybe there'll be a Scissor X in the future and this will be interesting, then this is an option. So this is definitely a card worth considering, and a card worth being aware of, because when your opponent busts one out to surprise you, you want to know what it does. At number 7, we have Pokemon League Headquarters. The attack cost for each basic Pokemon in play, both yours and your opponent's, is colorless more. So this is a card that later on in the game, against basic heavy decks like Chen Pao, like Lost Box, this is what you slap down after they've burned all their stadium cards, burned all their Lost Vacuums, and say, you don't get to attack anymore. That Sableye now needs 2 energy to attack. How effective this card will actually be, we will see. As a control card, I really like it. It's interesting. I do wish we had some sort of stadium lock in play that could be effective from the bench. Obviously, there is the Palkia, I think it is, from Celebrations that does that. But I would something like Ninetales. There was a Ninetales a while back that basically said your opponent can't play any stadium cards. So that would be very interesting. There is a Noivern X that, and a Whimsicott V-Star actually also, and Shadow Rider Calyrex V. So there's a bunch of stadium locks that could be used in different ways to prevent your opponent from playing a stadium card via attack. So there are ways that this card could be interesting. However, I don't expect it to be especially effective against things like Zacian V, because Gardevoir, which is where that deck's going to be played, can just flood energy on board and say, okay, whatever, it's just 1 extra energy. So, interesting, but maybe not the be-all, end-all stadium card that we might hope it would be against Lost Box. But it is perhaps maybe the first soft counter that Creatures has designed against Lost Box. You can tell that they're maybe starting to realize, hey, we need to pump the brakes on this deck a little bit. Next up at number 6, we have Toedscruel. Toedscruel has the ability Protective Filament, prevent all effects of attacks from your opponent's Pokemon done to all of your Pokemon that have energy attached. Existing effects are not removed, and damage is not an effect. So this is very much identical to Espeon VMAX's ability. Getting energy in play is not a big deal for Grass, especially if you have non-rule box Pokemon. You just protect all your Pokemon from the aforementioned Sableye, and you have Colony Rush as an attack to go with that. So Colony Rush does 80 plus damage, and then Attack does 40 more damage for each of your benched Pokemon with Grass energy attached. So you can play this with something like Charon from Battle Styles, flood your board with Grass energy, attached to everything that hasn't evolved, manually attached to whatever has, and voila, you have a bunch of damage ready to go. So if you have a full bench of 5 Pokemon and an active, an active Toedscruel, so 5 bench, it'd be 280, which is not bad with Choice Belt 310 against some of the bigger hitters, and 310 with Cleansing Gloves against Guardy. So can hit the numbers, not the easiest to hit the numbers, but you can definitely do it. If you feel like playing a bad deck, you could also play the Fortress and give your opponent free prize cards. Yeah, that's a way to do it too. So Toedscruel, definitely an option. One of the more interesting decks out of Obsidian Flames. I don't know how competitive it will be right out of the gate. Unfortunately, it does kind of suffer from needing to do too much itis, if you will. It really needs to get energy everywhere. It really needs to set up very, very quickly. But I could see it seeing some success here and there, for sure. Next up is Town Store. So Town Store says once during each player's turn, that player may search their deck for a Pokemon tool card, reveal it, and put it into their hand. Then that player shuffles their deck. So this is just an easy way for you to search out your your 4 seal stones, because let's be honest, that's what this is going to be used for. Nobody cares about any other tool in the game. They just want 4 seal stone, and that's what this is going to be used to find. And maybe randomly a choice belt or defiance band or something. But it's for 4 seal stone. Card's so broken, so strong. Town Sword just makes it even easier to find that card, and that by itself makes Town Store an interesting inclusion for any deck that happens to run 4 Sealstone. So be aware of it, because it's definitely going to see play. Next up is Glamora. Glamora has the ability Dust Field. As long as this Pokemon is in the active spot, your opponent can't have more than 3 bench Pokemon. If they have 4 or more bench Pokemon, they discard bench Pokemon until they have 3 Pokemon on the bench. If more than one effect changes the number of bench Pokemon allowed, use the smaller number. So basically this is a one-sided parallel city, so there's no effect on you. Parallel city had another effect, reduces your damage, I think, for certain types. But this effect says just your opponent, only 3 Pokemon, screw their bench. That's really cool, right? As long as it's in the active spot, they can have a big bench. And then Poison Gem for 140, which you don't care about that. So Dustfield, this Glamora is interesting in control, right? So if you can keep it alive in the active spot, prevent your opponent from attacking in the active spot, I think it's not bad, right? This would be much cooler though if it were something you could just kind of float stone out of the active. So like a hit and run, or just some way that you could not have to have it in the active spot all the time, where it's just in the active, dumps their bench, goes back to the bench, and then you have something attack, right? So maybe some sort of like, what is it, eject? So there's a tool in Pokemon VGC. It's like eject button or something along those lines, where basically it like just pulls them out of the active spot, right? Something along those lines, where at the end of the turn it forces it to the bench. Something like that would be really, really cool too. But as it is, it's definitely a control card. It will definitely see some play, and it will very much frustrate some players, perhaps yourself included. Definitely me, I'm sure. Then decks that like to go wide, like Gardevoir and Mew, will really, really hate you. But this is, in effect, it's very much like a more complicated to set up Avery, that also gives up 2 prize cards. Avery, of course, draws you 3 cards and makes them also discard till they have 3. But if this doesn't get knocked out, or if it stays in the active spot, it forces them to stay at 3. They don't just have to try to find a way to recover Pokemon. Now they have to try to find a way to recover the space on their bench, not just the Pokemon that were on it. Next up is Pidgeot EX. So the ability is Quick Search. This is not a Pokemon power, it is an ability. Once during your turn, you may search your deck for a card and put it into your hand, then shuffle your deck. You can't use more than 1 Quick Search ability each turn. This ability is insane. It is a 4 Seal Stone every single turn. Yes, this is a stage 2, but this is a 4 Seal Stone every single turn. This is half of a Star Birth every single turn that this Pidgeot is alive. That is cracked. However, it is a stage 2. So in the current format, it may be too much to ask for a deck. So decks that are already running Rare Candy could consider running a 101 line. Some decks are already running a 1-1 Arceus V-Star line for similar reasons. However, the flip side is that Arceus V-Star gets 2 cards. So that could be in Chien-Pao, for example. That's your Excalibur and your Rare Candy. Or that's your Irida and X card, right? Pidgeot just gets you the 1. But it is every turn. So you will have to find out in testing whether the Pidgeot and the Rare Candy that it consumes are good enough in the deck to be worth the inclusion over something like Arceus. And if they're worth the inclusion, that could risk being risk you having to give up 2 prize cards. Now, again, one more thing to note before we move on to number 2 is this does have free retreat. So this is a pivot Pokemon also. So this card's going to see play. It may not be right away, but it will definitely see play. At number 2, Tyranitar. Tyranitar has Mountain Bash, does 120 damage. Discard the top 2 cards for your deck. Cool. Don't like the discarding yourself, but once you're set up, it may not even matter. 120 damage is definitely good enough to get some chip damage in against most anything. And then Lightning Rampage, Thor's Rampage, if you saw the fan translation. 150 plus damage. If any of your benched Pokemon have any damage counters on them, this attack does 100 more damage. So if you're playing Gengar from Lost Origin, you can pull it from the discard pile onto the bench, put the damage counters on it, and you have a magic extra 100 damage, which is pretty nice. In the future, we may have a Dodrio from the 151 set that puts damage counters on it to draw cards. Also could be very good for a deck like this. And it also works as a single prize attacker, which makes Tyranitar even more interesting. Once we get that in September, do keep Tyranitar in mind. Tyranitar also happens to be a lightning type with 340 HP. That is nothing to scoff at. And with it being lightning type, it does wallop Lugia. So as long as Tyranitar can set up faster than Lugia, or at least in a reasonable clip, it will tear Lugia apart. That 120 damage doubled with a choice belt. The 150 times 2 is, yeah, that's right, 300. That's an instant KO on Lugia. So yeah, even an evolved Lugia V-Star. Definitely worth noting. However, whether or not Tyranitar is competitive against the rest of the field remains to be seen. Our current list seems pretty good so far. We've had some good luck with it. We will be doing a Versus the World with it most likely. I think it's a deck that's one of the better performers. We don't have time for 2 Versus the Worlds this set release. So the other deck that would probably have taken that spot would have been Charizard, but I think Tyranitar is probably the best performer overall and the best well-rounded. So I think Tyranitar will probably get the Versus the World spot. That said, Tyranitar is worth keeping an eye on, even if it doesn't do immediately well. It will probably do better with 151. And with more rotations, I think we'll just continue to do better and better. That said, we do have our number 1 deck to go over still. And that number one card to go over still is Charizard. Now, let's be honest, this set is Charizard the set. Charizard is the star of the set. Obsidian Flames is his home. And Charizard's ability, Infernal Rain, means that he is absolutely the king of this set. Charizard has the ability that says when you play this Pokemon from your hand to evolve one of your Pokemon during your turn, you may search your deck for up to 3 basic fire energy cards and attach them to your Pokemon in any way you like, then shuffle your deck. So you are accelerating energy to yourself in any way you like. So you don't even have to necessarily charge up this Charizard to do crazy amounts of acceleration, right? You could attach this to a benched Entei or to another Charizard. And if you have the Pokemon Go Charizard in play, you can just attach a single energy to this one and get it completely powered up because of the energy doubling. Come 151, you can attach the 2 energy to the other Charizard X that will do crazy amounts of damage for 4 or 5 energy. I can't remember how many it is. But that's a lot of damage. And we haven't even, that's a lot of energy, and we haven't even talked about the attack yet. So crazy acceleration ability, and now let's talk about the attack. So Burning Darkness for 2 fire says 180 plus damage. This attack does 30 more damage for each prize card your opponent has taken. So even with just them having taken 2 prize cards, you'll already be doing 240 damage without weakness. And this Pokemon, if you'll note, is not a fire type Pokemon. It is a darkness type Pokemon, which means it will be hitting for weakness against Gardevoir and most notably against Mew. So if Mew isn't dead now, it will be dead very soon. I say that knowing it's not going to be the case, but this will hopefully be one more nail in its resilient coffin. Now, even if you're not worried about seeing Mew, maybe Mew does manage to vanish, you are still hitting weakness on Gardevoir, and Gardevoir is still a very strong deck with a very good engine, and Gardevoir X in particular has a decent amount of HP and is darkness weak. So you gust up their Gardevoir, knock it out, maybe Lost Zone it, and just shut off their ability to do whatever they want, which is, of course, not what Gardevoir wants to see. So Charizard, definitely the best new card in this set, simply because of its crazy acceleration ability. It's pretty good attack, and let's be honest, it's the king of the set. There was no doubt. That said, that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this little bonus video. the bonus video of this week. This is the top 10 cards from Obsidian Flames. Hopefully you enjoy your pre-releases this weekend and next. They look like they'll be some fun. Don't know exactly what's in the kits just yet, but if you keep an eye on justinbasil.com, there will be a link that goes live on the main page as soon as we do know. So that said, thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video.